Before you start watching, please help the channel thrive, give it a like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Let me start this with one simple question. What the hell is wrong with Amazon? You had in your hands one of the most legendary fantasy IPs in the entire world. A series that stands toe-to-toe with The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. A 14-book epic that Robert Jordan spent 20 years of his life building, with over 90 million copies sold worldwide. A universe so detailed it has its own languages, calendars, races, and a magic system so tight and thought out it makes every other fantasy series look lazy. You spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this project. You had a built-in global fan base that waited decades for a proper adaptation. You had the chance to make the next Game of Thrones, the next defining fantasy series of a generation. And what did you do? You pumped out 3 messy, lazy, disrespectful seasons, and then unceremoniously canceled the whole thing before you even gave it a proper ending. And the worst part of it all, you never even understood why people hated what you made. You thought the complaints were just about small changes, about nitpicks from angry book fans. But no. What you made was not an adaptation of The Wheel of Time. It was a messy, soulless mess wrapped in a thick layer of performative political correctness. And today, we're going to tear every single part of this disaster apart. Before we get into the absolute garbage fire of the show itself, let me get every casual viewer up to speed on exactly what we lost here. The Wheel of Time is not just some random fantasy book series. It is one of the big 3 of Western fantasy. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Robert Jordan built a world that spans thousands of years of history, with prophecies that tie back to the very first page of the first book, with characters that grow and change in ways that feel real and earned, with a central conflict between light and darkness that is so much more nuanced than just good versus evil. This was not a series that lacked material. It was not a series that needed to be fixed. It was a series that just needed to be adapted with care, with respect, and with a basic understanding of what made the books so beloved in the first place. And Amazon had every single advantage you could ask for. When the first season dropped, it broke viewing records for Prime Video. It had the biggest premiere of any fantasy series on the platform at the time. Fans were hyped. Casual viewers were curious. Everyone was ready to dive into this incredible world. All you had to do was stick to the core of the books. Give us the characters we loved. Give us the epic moments we waited decades to see on screen, and you would have had a hit on your hands. A series that could have run for 8 or 10 seasons. That could have made household names out of its cast. That could have been the flagship fantasy series for your platform. But instead, you pissed it all away 3 seasons later. The show's IMDb rating has dropped from a solid 7.5 for the first few episodes to a miserable 5.9 for the 3rd season. The audience scores are even worse. Viewership tanked with every single season, and then Amazon just pulled the plug. No final season to wrap up the story. No movie to give the fans closure. Just a cancellation notice, and a bunch of broken promises. And as someone who has loved these books for over 15 years, I can tell you, it is infuriating. It is heartbreaking, and it is entirely your own fault. Now let's get into the first and most unforgivable sin of this entire show. The casting. And let me be very clear here before anyone tries to twist my words. I have zero problem with diverse casting. Zero. Game of Thrones had an incredibly diverse cast, and many of those characters became fan favorites. The issue is not diversity. The issue is that Amazon and the writers use diversity as a shield, as an excuse to completely ignore the basic lore and character descriptions from the books, to cast people based on checkboxes instead of whether they fit the character, or could even act. And in doing so, they broke the very foundation of the world before the first episode even finished. Take the 2 Rivers. For anyone who has not read the books, the 2 Rivers is an isolated valley, cut off from the rest of the world for hundreds of years. The people there are all direct descendants of the last king of mandragoran. They have been marrying within their own community for generations. They share very specific physical traits. They look like a cohesive group of people. That is not a racist detail. That is a core plot point. Their bloodline is why they are the only people who can be the dragon reborn. Why they have the strength to channel the one power. Why they are the center of the entire story. But what did the show do? It turned the 2 Rivers into the United Nations. You have people of every single race and ethnicity living there, with zero explanation, zero acknowledgement, zero care for the lore. I watched the first episode and thought to myself, this is an isolated village that has not had contact with the outside world for hundreds of years. How is this possible? It breaks the immersion immediately. It makes the world feel fake. It makes the core plot point of their shared bloodline feel meaningless. And the worst part is, the writers knew this. They just did not care. Because they cared more about checking their diversity boxes than they did about making a coherent world. And that is just the start. The worst damage was done to the core characters of the series. The 3 boys from the 2 Rivers, Rand al'Thor, cauthon, and Perrin Aybara. These 3 are the heart and soul of the books. Each has a distinct personality, a distinct arc, a distinct role to play in the fight against the Dark One. Rand is the dragon reborn, a farm boy who has to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, who struggles with madness and power and destiny. Matt is the charming rogue, the gambler with a heart of gold, who runs from responsibility but always ends up doing the right thing. Perrin is the gentle giant, the blacksmith who can talk to wolves, who struggles with his own strength and his fear of hurting the people he loves. These are three fully realized characters, with their own strengths and flaws, and they are just as important to the story as any of the female characters. But what did the show do? In their desperate rush to push a forced girl power narrative, they stripped all three of these men of their agency, their intelligence, their moments. They turned them into bumbling, useless, whiny man-children who do nothing but cause problems and get in the way of the female characters. Let me be clear. Female empowerment is a great thing. The Wheel of Time books are full of incredible, powerful, complex female characters. The Aes Sedai are some of the most well-written female characters in all of fantasy. You do not need to tear down the male characters to make the female characters look strong. That is not empowerment. That is lazy writing. That is disrespectful to the source material, and it makes every single character on screen feel flat and one-dimensional. And do not even get me started on what they did to La Mandragoran. In the books, Lan is the uncrowned king of Malkir, a legendary swordsman, a warrior who has spent his entire life preparing to fight the Dark One. He is stoic, disciplined, honorable. He is the ultimate guardian, the only person who can stand at the Dragon Reborn's side and keep him alive. He has one of the most tragic and compelling backstories in the entire series. And what did the show turn him into? A lovesick puppy dog who does nothing but follow Moiraine around and mope about his feelings. His fighting skills are inconsistent at best. He gets his ass handed to him in fights he would have won easily in the books. His entire character is reduced to being Moiraine's side piece. It is insulting. It is a complete misunderstanding of who Lan is as a character. And it is just one more example of how the writers did not care about the source material at all. The most pathetic part of all this is that the writers thought they were being progressive. They thought they were breaking stereotypes. They thought they were doing something important. But all they did was make every character worse. They took a diverse cast of characters with rich inner lives and turned them into hollow tokens. They made the world feel incoherent and fake. They alienated the core fanbase that was ready to support this show. And they confused casual viewers who had no idea what was going on. And then when people complained, they hid behind the diversity shield. They called the fans racist, or sexist, or any other buzzword they could think of, instead of just admitting that they did a bad job, that they did not respect the source material, that they failed the fans and the author. But the casting is only half the problem. The other half is the actors themselves, or more specifically, the group of woke, activist actors who spent more time pushing their political agendas off-screen than they did learning their lines or reading the books. You know the type. The actors who take a role in a beloved adaptation and then immediately start talking about how the source material is problematic, how they need to fix the character, how they need to make the story more inclusive or more progressive. As if they know better than the author who created the world. As if they know better than the millions of fans who love the books. The biggest example of this is Rosamund Pike, who plays Moiraine Denodred. Now, Rosamund Pike is a talented actress. There is no denying that. But she had way too much creative control over this show, and she used that control to completely warp Moiraine's character into something unrecognizable. In the books, Moiraine is a blue Ajah Aes Sedai, a master manipulator, a brilliant strategist, a woman who has spent 20 years of her life searching for the Dragon Reborn. She is calm, collected, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Her entire life is dedicated to this one mission. Her bond with Lan is one of the most beautiful and complex relationships in the books, a deep, platonic soul bond that goes beyond romance. But what did Rosamund Pike do? She demanded that the writers add multiple unnecessary same-sex romantic storylines for Moiraine. She pushed for the focus to be on her personal relationships instead of her mission to find the dragon. She stripped Moiraine of her intelligence and her agency, turning her into a character who is constantly making mistakes, who is constantly caught off guard, who spends more time in bed than she does planning for the end of the world. And the worst part is, most of the cast did not even bother to read the books. In interview after interview, the actors would be asked basic questions about their characters, about the lore of the world, and they would have no idea what the interviewer was talking about. They would just ramble about how excited they were to be part of a diverse cast, or how they wanted to make their character more relatable to modern audiences. They had zero respect for the source material, zero interest in understanding the characters they were playing. They just saw this show as a paycheck, as a way to build their own personal brand as woke activists, instead of as a chance to bring iconic characters to life. Compare that to the cast of Game of Thrones. Every single actor on that show read the books. They knew their characters inside and out. They fought to keep their characters true to the source material. They cared about the story. They cared about the fans. And that is why those performances are so iconic. That is why that show worked. The cast of The Wheel of Time did the exact opposite. They showed up. They read their lines. They did the bare minimum. And then they went on social media and talked about how progressive they were for being in the show. And then when the show got bad reviews, when the fans complained, they acted like the victims. Like the fans just did not understand their artistic vision. It is pathetic. It is unprofessional. And it is a huge reason why this show failed. You can have the best source material in the world. You can have the biggest budget in the world. But if your cast does not care about the story, if your writers do not respect the source material, if everyone involved is more interested in pushing their own political agenda than they are in making a good show, it is all going to fall apart. And that is exactly what happened here. The cast and the writers were so busy patting themselves on the back for being progressive that they forgot to make a show that was actually good, that was actually faithful to the books, that people actually wanted to watch. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. So what if the casting was bad? So what if the actors were annoying? Game of Thrones had bad casting choices too, and it still became a cultural phenomenon. Why did this show get canceled? And the answer is simple. The casting and the actors are just the tip of the iceberg. The real rot is in the writing, in the pacing, in the complete destruction of the core lore and the world building. The writers of this show did not just change a few details. They took a sledgehammer to the very foundation of the Wheel of Time. They turned an epic fantasy story about the end of the world into a slow and boring, messy soap opera about relationship drama. They took the most complex magic system in fantasy and turned it into a cheap plot device that changes every single episode. They took characters with decades of lore and backstory and turned them into one-dimensional caricatures. And that is what we are going to talk about in part 2. We're going to dig into the terrible writing, the glacial pacing that makes paint drying look exciting, the complete destruction of the core lore of the Wheel of Time, the cheap, lazy special effects that look like they were made on a 2008 YouTube budget. We are going to break down exactly how Amazon and these terrible writers took a guaranteed hit of a show and ran it straight into the ground, how they pissed away hundreds of millions of dollars and left millions of fans with nothing but a half-finished, disrespectful mess. I know I am not the only one who feels this way. I know there are thousands of you out there who watched the first episode with so much excitement, who saw the two rivers, who saw the Aes Sedai, who saw the Trollocs, and felt that thrill of seeing something you loved come to life, only to have that excitement crushed more and more with every single episode, only to watch the show get worse and worse, until you finally got the news that it had been canceled. That feeling is not just disappointment, it is grief. It is the grief of seeing something you love get butchered by people who did not care about it, who did not understand it, who only saw it as a way to make money and push their own agendas. So, if you are one of those people, if this show broke your heart too, do me a favor, hit the like button on this video. It helps the video reach more people who feel the same way. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel, so you do not miss part 2, where we really get into the nitty-gritty of just how bad this show really was. And while you are down there, leave a comment. Tell me what pissed you off the most about this adaptation. Was it the character assassination? Was it the lore changes? Was it the terrible pacing? Let me know. We could all rant about it together in the comments.